Imagine the Garden of Eden, a perfect paradise filled with lush trees, crystal clear rivers, and the presence of God walking among the first humans. The scene is one of peace and harmony. But then, an enigmatic character enters the stage, a figure we all know or think we know. From a young age, we learned that there was a cunning serpent slithering among the trees, ready to deceive Adam and Eve. A simple creature, but deadly clever. However, what if I told you that this serpent might not be exactly what we think? That the animal we visualize crawling on the ground could actually hide something much deeper, more mysterious and complex? Prepare for a journey to the heart of ancient scriptures, where the original Hebrew can reveal secrets that completely change the way we see this well-known story. Today, we will discover whether the serpent in the Garden of Eden was really a serpent, or if there was something more behind that figure. In the book of Genesis, the scene is clearly set. Adam and Eve live in the garden, surrounded by everything they need. God gives them a single instruction: do not eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then the serpent appears. It does not emerge violently. It does not attack with brute force, but with words, with a careful insinuation. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? This is the serpent as we know it, sneaky, persuasive, the figure that initiates the fall of humanity. But this familiar view is merely a superficial layer. If we return to the original text, written in Hebrew, we find something much more intriguing. The term serpent comes from the word Nachash, which carries deeper meanings than just a simple crawling creature. So, what is really happening here? Was the serpent merely a symbol, or a being much more complex, shrouded in mystery and deception? Let's move forward, and perhaps the hidden truth in the Hebrew will reveal a new way to understand this ancient story. The Hebrew word Nachash, which we use for serpent, is where everything begins to unfold. In the original Hebrew, this word is fascinating because it can have several meanings. Of course, it can refer to a literal snake, as we imagine, but that is just one layer. Nachash is also connected to the idea of shining or gleaming, as if it relates to a dazzling, almost supernatural creature. Additionally, this word can carry a connotation of divining or enchanting, which leads us to wonder if this serpent was something much more intelligent and cunning, perhaps even possessing a type of power or wisdom that surpasses the ordinary. So, what are we really looking at here? A physical, slithering, venomous serpent? Or a more powerful entity with an almost divine presence, bringing deception in a way that goes beyond simple tricks? The Hebrew opens a door for us to consider that what confronted Adam and Eve was not just an animal, but something or someone that carried a far more complex intention. Now that we understand the layers of the term Nachash, an important question arises. If this serpent was not just an ordinary animal, what exactly could it be? The Hebrew text invites us to consider another possibility. Nachash doesn't have to be interpreted as a crawling creature, but as something more elevated. Think about it. The serpent in Genesis speaks with Eve, reasons, deceives, and seems to possess a wisdom that far exceeds what we would expect from a mere animal. Not only does it speak, but it directly questions the words of God, something quite audacious for a common being. If we look closely, the behavior of the serpent resembles more that of a spiritual entity, someone with intelligence, cunning, and even a deep understanding of human nature. Some scholars suggest that the Nachash could be a reference to a fallen angelic being, something closer to a corrupted divine messenger, like Satan, who later appears in the Bible as the great deceiver. So perhaps we are not talking about an animal at all, but rather a spiritual creature, disguised as a serpent, who manipulated the first humans in a way that was far more sophisticated than we ever imagined. If the serpent was more than just an animal, its actions also deserve a deeper analysis. Look at what it does. It speaks to Eve, plants doubt, and leads her to question God's direct command. This is not a simple act of temptation. It is a cunning deception, carefully calculated. Think about it. What kind of creature would have the ability to converse in such a way? Animals don't talk, but here we have something that not only speaks, but also understands the depth of the divine prohibition and manipulates God's words for its own ends. The serpent not only contradicts God, but does so in a way that sounds reasonable and seductive to Eve. It's as if it knows exactly how to exploit her weaknesses. Moreover, it promises something that seems divine. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. This is not just any statement. It is an invitation to power, to superior knowledge. All of this leads us to believe that the serpent possesses intelligence, power, and intention far beyond what we could imagine from a mere animal. And here lies the crucial question. A being with these characteristics, capable of understanding and manipulating divine creation, aligns more with a corrupted spiritual entity than with an ordinary creature. The serpent appears to operate with divine knowledge, but directed towards deception and destruction, an unmistakable hallmark of something far more dangerous. If we look deeper into the Bible, we find other spiritual creatures that possess characteristics similar to those of the serpent. Celestial beings, such as angels and cherubim, are described in various passages with impressive abilities, superior intelligence, wisdom, and power. Some of these beings, like Lucifer, fell from divine grace, becoming adversaries of God. Now think about this. What if the serpent was actually one of these fallen spiritual entities, now seeking to distort God's creation from the very beginning? It knew exactly how to manipulate Eve's free will, using a blend of truth and lies. And the promise it made, "You will be like God," sounds much more like a deep spiritual deception than a mere animal trick. Lucifer, also known as Satan, is referred to in other parts of Scripture as the deceiver and the accuser. He is described as one who constantly seeks to corrupt God's creation, often disguised as something beautiful or appealing. And remember, he is also a spiritual being who, like the serpent, directly opposes God. This leads us to the possibility that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was not just an animal, but rather a disguise for an evil spiritual being, possibly Satan himself or one of his manifestations. A being that knew how to present itself attractively, using its words cunningly and planting the seed of doubt in the human heart. This idea of the serpent being more than just a simple animal is not only theological. It also has roots in other cultures and ancient mythologies. In various traditions, serpents or serpent-like creatures are often linked to deities, hidden wisdom, or even spiritual beings that control knowledge. For example, in ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian religions, serpents were seen as symbols of power and secret knowledge. They appeared associated with gods who had control over life and death, or who possessed hidden wisdom. Very similar to what the serpent in the Garden of Eden promises Eve, divine knowledge, the kind that only celestial beings could possess. These connections between serpents and the divine may have influenced how ancient readers of the biblical text understood this figure. For them, the serpent was not just a physical creature, but something that carried spiritual and mystical symbolism. It would be easy, then, to see the serpent of Genesis as a figure associated with spiritual deception, something beyond flesh and bone, with a much deeper purpose: to corrupt what God had created. So what we have here is a hint that the story of the serpent could reflect not only a physical event, but also a much larger spiritual conflict. A conflict between spiritual beings, in which the fate of humanity was influenced from the very beginning. If the serpent was indeed a spiritual entity and not just an animal, it completely changes how we understand the impact of this event in the biblical narrative. This was not merely a simple betrayal within a garden, but part of a much larger spiritual war, a battle between good and evil that began in heaven and reflected itself on earth. And this raises a profound question. Why would God allow such a powerful and cunning entity access to the Garden of Eden, where his first humans resided? Perhaps this is part of a greater test, a trial of obedience and trust in the Creator. The presence of the serpent, or this corrupted spiritual being, would represent the choice we all have: to follow divine truth or to fall for lies disguised as enticing promises. Furthermore, if the serpent was a spiritual entity that had already fallen, This implies that the celestial conflict was already underway before humanity's creation. The story of Genesis would not only be about the fall of man, but also about how this fall was influenced by a much larger war, a battle between God and those who opposed him. The deception of the serpent, then, fits perfectly into this scheme. It's not just about the forbidden fruit. It's about the attempt to corrupt God's creation from the very beginning, to bring darkness into what God had declared good. This understanding deepens the narrative, illustrating how the choices made in the garden reverberate throughout history, shaping the human experience in a world marked by the ongoing struggle between light and darkness. Throughout the centuries, theologians and scholars have attempted to decipher this enigmatic figure. Understanding the serpent as a spiritual being is not a new concept. In Christian tradition, it has often been associated with Satan, the adversary of God. In the New Testament, the book of Revelation refers to Satan as the ancient serpent, directly linking him to the figure in Eden. What is even more intriguing is that this interpretation is not unanimous. Some ancient scholars viewed the serpent as a symbol of humanity's desire to challenge divine authority, while others, particularly in Jewish traditions, saw it as a metaphor for humanity's internal conflict, the struggle between following divine wisdom or succumbing to the deception of ambition. In both interpretations, the serpent is not merely an animal. It represents a force, an idea, a choice. In the following centuries, this figure continued to evolve. Some began to see the serpent as an archetype of the tempter, present in various cultures around the world, always symbolizing one who offers something that seems good but conceals inner destruction. Whether viewed as a real entity or a symbolic representation, the impact of the serpent in Genesis resonates deeply in reflections on the nature of evil, temptation, and choice. Thus, throughout history, the serpent has transformed from a simple crawling animal into a powerful and multifaceted symbol, a figure that represents not only external evil, but also the deception that arises within the human heart when confronted with temptation. This transformation invites us to examine our own choices and the inner struggles we face, echoing the ancient story in a way that remains relevant today. And now, we reach the climax of this reflection. As we consider the serpent in Genesis under this new light, we are led to think about the implications of this narrative in our daily lives. What does it teach us about ourselves and the world around us? If the serpent is indeed a symbol of deception and temptation, it reminds us that the battle between good and evil is not just an ancient story, but a struggle that remains relevant today. Each of us faces our own serpents, those voices that whisper seductive promises, leading us to doubt what is right and true. The account challenges us to reflect on our choices and how we can often be drawn to paths that seem promising, but may lead to devastating consequences. Moreover, the presence of such a cunning entity in the Garden of Eden prompts us to consider the nature of free will. The choice of Adam and Eve was not merely about a fruit, but about trust in God and recognition of his sovereignty. Thus, the narrative urges us to question, in whom are we placing our trust? What influences are we allowing to shape our decisions? As we conclude this journey through the complexities of the serpent in Genesis, we are left with an open question. How can we discern the truth in a world filled with deception? The story of the serpent is a constant reminder that the choices we make carry profound and lasting weight. Ultimately, it invites us to seek not only knowledge but divine wisdom, so that we may walk in truth and light.